Babu sir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon.
സാറിന്റെ PPT ഒന്ന് ലോഡ് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കണോ? PPT ലോഡ് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കണോ എന്തെങ്കിലും കുഴപ്പമുണ്ടോ?
ഒന്ന് ചേരിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്നുകൂടി ഒന്ന് ഇട്ടേക്കാം. സർ കാണാൻ പറ്റണ്ടോ?
കാണാം. കറക്റ്റ്.
ഓക്കെ.
പെർഫെക്റ്റ് ഓൾറൈറ്റ്. നവീൻ തുടങ്ങാറാകുമ്പോ എന്ന് പറയണം. എത്ര നമ്മൾ എക്സാക്ട് 2 o'clock അല്ലേ?
Yes, sir. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.
Okay. Naveen, start idala. Okay, we can start the program. I hope so. It's 2 o'clock. So, good afternoon, everybody. And today is the second day of your induction program. And the first day you have inauguration ceremony and so many KTU presentations. And today we have a very good topic, disaster management. You know, South India is very vulnerable to many natural calamities, especially Kerala is very vulnerable to landsliding, floods, cyclones, and so many other calamities. Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea is very vulnerable to various seasonal changes and various changes in the sea. Occasionally, it is happening. So we are facing a lot of problems in the nature of natural hazards. So today it is what is the role of an engineer if suppose a natural calamity happens. In 2017-18 during the flood period of time, the College of Engineering and Trivandrum students were capable to do a battery charging bank, developing a battery bank and distributing to the people where mobile phone charging was unable because power supply was not there. That was a great relief to people and to the community. Like that, how an engineer can immediately act when a disaster or a natural calamity happens. That's the main topic. And today we got a very right and apt and suitable person, our my dear friend Dr. Babu Josar. He is the right person for delivering a topic disaster management. He's working as a deputy general manager production FACT fertilizer and chemical staff at Gurudyog Mandal complex. He is a graduate engineering graduate in chemical engineering from NIT Raipur. He has done his doctorate PhD in management from SCSVMV University Kanchipuram and in MBA in marketing business that holds. Besides that, he holds a diploma in industrial safety, postgraduate diploma in environmental management, materials management, and executive diploma in project management too. And he joined FACT in 1991. He has more than 30 years of experience in various industries, especially in petrochemical and fertilizer process plant operation, troubleshooting and optimization process, auditing. He was associating and a lot of consultancy activities, production planning and management information system. And he was a merit recipient of FACT Republic Day Merit Award. He has awarded for the best performance excellence, and he is a chartered engineer and fellow of Institution of Engineers, life member of Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers, Indian Institute of Material Management, and Indian Institute of Industrial Engineering. And he is the present chairman of Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers, Kochi also. And he is honorary secretary of IACHE Kochi Regional Center from 2007 to 2010. And he's the resource person to various institutions like National Safety Council, Kerala Chapter, and the faculty of FACT Training Center. And he has safety diploma courses also handling as a certified internal auditor of ISO 9000 and ISO 40,000 and ISO 50,001. He has published various papers in various reputed international journals, national journals, and various conferences. He has presented various papers in chemical engineering, management and ammonia production, process safety, and climate change, and corporate governance and audit. And he has worked as in various capacities as an academician, as a trainer, and as an industrialist, and moreover a disaster management resource person. Various capacities are worked. And today Babu Josar is the right person for delivering to the aspirants, young aspirant engineers regarding the disaster management. With full-heartedly, I welcome you, sir, for this wonderful session. Sir, welcome you for this session, and over to you.
Thank you, Steffi, sir. So, good evening, my dear young friends and the new engineering aspirants, all the faculty members, respected faculty members. So today we are going to speak on the subject called disaster management. We will be discussing regarding disaster management. And in a disaster management, we will be focusing on certain things. What the disaster management expects from you, and what is the engineering aspirants can do for the science of disaster management. We will go to this slide presentation. Steffi sir, it is on the screen, I hope.
It is on the screen, sir. You can make it full screen.
Okay, it is now full screen as of now.
No, it is not full screen now. In the below there is a button again. Yeah.
Is it
Slideshow
not?
or full screen? No. Slideshow. Please go to slideshow, sir. Slideshow. Or you press F5. That same. Yes.
It is in the slide slow now.
Yeah. That button you just press, sir. That you just press the button, no, right in the right end, like a wine board. And next. That. Press it, sir. What's not coming? Then you go to the slideshow mode. It's not coming.
Full screen loud on.
View slideshow in the top. Next slideshow. From the begin, full screen. Not coming. Okay, no problem, sir. You continue. Slideshow, it has to come. From the beginning.
Is it okay now?
It's okay. Okay, sir. It's not coming. Anyhow, it's okay.
Okay. So, dear friends, welcome to the disaster management class, which we are going to speak on nearly for some time from now. Well, thank you, Steffi sir, for a very kind introduction. My dear friends, the contents of this presentation would be in this way. It is regarding an introduction. You will just have an introduction on the disaster management, the disasters we face, what is the difference between the incidents, accidents, and disasters. Then we will go into the disaster management. Then we will have the role of engineers. Then we will have a question and answer session. If you have any doubts, and if I can clarify on that. Well, you may be thinking that why the government and your university, your college is so much focusing on the disaster management and safety management, because you may be novice students who have joined these classes in the last 1 day or 2 days. But then you may be surprised that why the government is so much focusing on the disaster management part, that a presentation is arranged on the very next day. Well, for any government, safety is a very critical thing. As the Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero has told, that the safety of the law shall be highest law. So for any government anywhere in the world, the safety of the people is one of the very abiding needs that has to be fulfilled. And so the government of India, the government of Kerala, your Kerala Technical University, your college wants to see that the focus on the safety and disaster management is brought to you at a very first stage itself, because it is going to help in these turbulent times. We are living in very turbulent times, very disruptive times, when every day in the news media, in the papers, we see there are so many alerts regarding
Sir, excuse me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yes,
sir,
sir.
can you put the entire screen when you are loading? Can you put the entire screen when you are that loading? No, that time you just select entire screen, then it will come to full screen. Select the entire screen.
Okay, I will.
Just load it once again. Then that time you can select the entire screen. Then it will come to full show. Right. Yeah. Now you put the entire screen. Select the entire screen. In that uploading.
I'm not able to.
Okay. Then you make it to full screen, sir.
Is it okay now?
Now it's okay. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Now it's okay. Yes. Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Steffi sir. So the government is concerned about the safety of the people, and definitely that is one of the reasons why youngsters like you, technical new aspirants to engineering, are thought on the focus, how a class to focus on the safety and the disaster management. Well, safety and the disaster management is actually one of the needs. We all want to be safe. As per the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all do have physiological needs like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, etc. But the safety needs are on the second level of the hierarchy of our needs. So the thing is that safety is an inherent thing we all aspire as people, as citizens, and as family members. We all want our family members to be safe. Your families want you people to be safe. You want your friends and loved ones to be safe. The government wants the citizens to be safe. And that is why safety needs is one of the most important needs in the hierarchy of human needs. And that is why the focus of the safety and disaster management is so important and critical in today's conditions. So coming to the next thing is that as you have understood that the safety is one of our basic evolutionary needs that we are going to focus on. But most of our decisions and actions are based. You came to college based why? Because you want to improve your circumstances, you want to have a better life as an engineer, and all those things. So most of our human decisions and actions are based on sustaining or improving our circumstances. The human civilization story is also of that. Our ancestors were cavemen. From there, we have come to the industrial era. Well, now we are not in the constant danger like the early man or our cave people are there, but we also have that drive, need to be safe in this industrial era too. For example, we are no less driven by the need of safety for us and our loved ones. We insist that our family members, our friends, go to the road in a car, on a bike, using a helmet, using a seat belt, airbag cars. Why? Basically because is that somewhere in our, we worry about our loved ones and we want to see that they are safe. So in a way, modern disaster management is a very much an ongoing personal requirement of the people as well as a national requirement. And that is why it is so important to the governments and the people. Well, in today's world, there are so many increasing dangers. We are living in disruptive times. We are seeing the disruptive nature at its best. We have cyclones, flash floods, earthquakes. We also have, on the other hand, the vagaries of war, terrorism, and so many other things. Ecological damages, ecological things. So it is very significant as in the dangers are being increasing in the world environment. And so in that way also the focus on the safety management is becoming very, very critical. What do we wish? We all basically wish only one thing. We only basically wish one thing: to return home safe. The thing is that you want to return safe from your colleges. People want to return home from their. People want to return safe from their working places, and these are the things that we wish. So we want to arrive safe. We want to work safe. We want to go home safe. This is the motto of all of our people. You are arriving safe. You want to be. You want to be studying safe. You have to go home safe because out people are waiting for you. So return safe is a part and parcel of our lives. And that is why safety comes first into our mind whenever we go there. If we go out in a bus, if we go out in a travel, if we go out in a leisure, if we go out in a party, always safety comes first somewhere as a human psychological need as of today's. And that is why the focus, you have to be safe, you have to learn how to be safe too. And in a today's, so the focus is coming on the safety and the disaster management. Well, if you get time, do read Jose Saramago's Portuguese writer and recipient of 1998 Nobel Prize in Literature. He has told a very beautiful statement that chaos is the order yet undeciphered. We live in a lot of chaos around us, sometimes in our personal life, sometimes in our working places, sometimes in the countries and the conditions around us. There's a lot of chaos going on. We don't know which is the order. We always think that chaos is abnormal, but when we see the nature, chaos was a law of the nature. Always any chaos in the nature we see, it is a law of the nature. There will be thunderstorms, there will be lightnings, there will be storms, there will be air. But order was always the dream of the man. So from chaos being a law of nature to order a dream of man is the travel of the subject called safety and disaster management. So what we need is an order in the chaos that is going to be there as a part of the law of nature. So be it natural disasters, be it man-made disasters, chaos is going to be there and we want order. And in that travel, we always have this safety and disaster management as a technology, as a science for that destination. To have order in our dreams, to have order in our works. So what should we do? So we are supposed to be getting prepared for an emergency. For example, anything you go out, you should be prepared for an emergency. You go out, you know that it is going to rain. You carry an umbrella, you carry a raincoat. The thing is that, but we have to plan. So we have to plan before going out. Then actually you have to do, and then you have to study the conditions. You have to see that if you have to use umbrella or not. So then you have to act if you have to use it or not. So this plan, do, study, act is going to be a part and parcel of your coming years in the college. And also it is very truthful and correct for the safety management too, because we have to plan how to face a disaster. We have to do many things during a disaster. We have to study what is going to be the impact of the disaster, and we have to act during a disaster. So these are the basic things that we are going to be pondering about in the next 1 hour or so regarding disaster management. Well, if you think that safety, some people are safe, some people are not safe, you may be thinking that some people are very accident prone and some people are not accident prone. Well, there is a famous statement that safety is no accident, it is an attitude. If in your life, in your personal life, if you are having a casual attitude towards safety, we will end up in a casualty. So we have to be very clearly knowing that we should have a safety attitude as a young, responsible engineering student, as a young, responsible citizen of this country, as a young, responsible citizen of our place, and as also as a family member. So we should have an attitude of safety. Without an attitude, why we should have an attitude is that because the safety attitudes form safety behaviors. And if we don't have safety behavior, the consequences would be there. So you may be thinking, what is a safety attitude? Safety attitude is very simple. It is a concern for others, a concern for your safety and others' safety. We have to stay informed on the safety procedures, safety rules. We have to follow the safety rules and procedures. We have to identify the hazards. And we have to see that we stay healthy, fit, and focused to develop that attitude towards safety. Otherwise, we won't be having the behavioral changes to have a safety culture imbibed in us. So this is a very critical thing in any disaster management in the coming times. Now we are going to focus on certain words which we listen on an everyday basis, like incidents, accidents, disasters? Well, most of us, most of you, most of all of us, we do slip sometimes, we do fall sometimes, but we do bump into each other sometimes. We may be accidentally falling something, we may be tripping over some things. But what is the difference between an incident, an accident, and a disaster? Before going into disaster management, let us be very clear on that. Well, an incident is an unexpected event that does not, any unexpected event that does not result in a serious loss or injury. Well, you slipped and fell down a wet floor in your college, in your house, but no major injury has happened. You accidentally bumped into your friend, nothing has happened. So there is no serious loss or injury. Well, then what is an accident? Accident is also an unexpected event that causes damage, injury, or harm. So in an accident, even if it is an unexpected event, it will cause some damage, it will cause some injury or harm. You bump your vehicle, somebody bumps your vehicle into your vehicle, or you fell off from your cycle, your scooter, and have a broken muscle. So it is definitely an accident. But then what is a disaster? Disaster is an accident also, but of an unexpected natural and man-made catastrophe of a substantial extent causing significant physical damage or destruction. It will create loss of life or sometimes permanent change to the national environment and also to the economy of the place where the disaster is going to happen. So we have to understand it is a catastrophe of a great extent, which is going to change the pattern of that place in the coming times, maybe economically or ecologically or environmentally too. So that is why we should be prepared for a disaster and how to manage in a disaster. And that is why basically disaster management is becoming the focus of technology and technocrats and the academy and industry the world over. Well, do you think that the accidents happen just like that? Scientific studies says that accidents do not happen. They don't, we say accidents happen, but it doesn't happen. They are caused. And if you analyze properly, scientific analysis has seen that the 4 major causes of accidents are normally on a personal level. I didn't think, I didn't see, I didn't know, or I didn't ask. So these are the reasons why accidents do happen. So, well, next time you fall in an accident or you get the information of accident, just analyze. Is something of this is missing? Either somebody has not thought, somebody has not seen, somebody has not known, or somebody has not asked. So the scientific theory behind the accidents is that they do not happen, they are caused. Well, the science of engineering and safety engineering has a long history. If we go on to the incidents, why they happen, if you see in the papers, there are so many deaths, so many fatalities happening. Just remember that Herbert William Henrich, he studied a lot of industrial accidents and formed what is known as accident triangle or Henrich triangle or Bird's triangle. It says that one fatality or that person, before that, many things would have happened. There would have been a 3 lakh unsafe conditions, unsafe acts or hazards, 30,000 near misses, first aids, medical aids, minor incidents. 300 lost time accidents would have happened. Serious disabling injury of 30 times would have happened. After this, only one life loss would be there, a fatality would be there. So these are the theories on which the industrial safety, the safety triangles have been built up. Because when you see a road accident and somebody is passed away or a fatal accident has happened, it doesn't happen just like that. There had been unsafe condition, there has been unsafe act, there has been many things which has not been recorded. So accidents are not happening just like that. It is one of the greatest things that science is proving regarding the accidents. Well, then you may be thinking that why do accidents happen? Well, the world over, it is understood that scientifically accidents happen because one or both of the following work together or come together. One is unsafe act and one is unsafe conditions. if either an unsafe act can cause an accident, an unsafe condition can cause an accident, or both of them together may come. So to understand what is an unsafe act and an unsafe condition, you look around yourselves, you look around your house, you look around your college, you look around your roads, you may see so many unsafe conditions at times. A slab missing on the road, a slab missing on the pavement, a wire protruding outside, you may not have the insulation on the wire covered. These are all unsafe conditions around us. But what are the unsafe acts? You go around without a helmet, you jump from a building height, and means on a spur of a moment that you can cover it. You don't judge the distance between when you cross over or overtake a vehicle. These are unsafe acts. So the studies of unsafe condition and unsafe acts, there are two studies that I want to highlight to you. Is that one is on the green study, that is Henrik's study of in 1980, around 85,000 sample of industrial accidents were analyzed, and it was found that out of the unsafe conditions and unsafe acts, unsafe conditions only form 10% of the accidents. But it is the unsafe act that form 88% of the accidents. And the rest 2% are act of God or is not deciphered in a proper way. We don't know. But we have to understand that unsafe acts, the human intervention is one of the critical things in any accident, in any disaster, any time. So the thing is that we will be more focusing on the unsafe acts in the industry, in the academia. So see that how these unsafe acts can be corrected. On the other hand, there's a DuPont study which was conducted in 2005 also says that unsafe conditions are only 4% of the total cause of injuries. So the unsafe act of the persons are one of the major reasons why safety accidents do happen in industry all around us. Because over the years, the design conditions, the conditions of safety have improved a lot. The safety engineering, the engineering of the different streams of our engineering have made the machines very safe and fit to withstand any things. But the unsafe acts are there because still there is a human intervention in all accidents or all injuries. So whenever you see an accident happening, remember that some unsafe act was involved in that injury or an accident. It's a 10% or a 4% chance of that it's an unsafe condition. But we have probably more interested in seeing that the unsafe acts are eliminated from us, from our friends, to see that we have a safe surroundings. Well, to have a depiction of what unsafe condition is, you are lifting a heavy thing is being lifted, a heavy box is being lifted by a crane. Well, if you see that the chain block which is lifting that entire block is rusted or not proper, it is an unsafe condition. And generally there will be inspection procedures, so it would be always checked, but it is an unsafe condition. But what is an unsafe act? An unsafe act is to carelessly stand below such a condition. The probabilities of falling of that may be less, but while you are standing or anybody is standing, any worker is standing below such a hooked weight which is lifted above, it is definitely an unsafe act. So then we have to understand what is a near miss. Sometimes we are lucky that when we travel by road, we overtake a truck, we overtake a vehicle, nothing happens. It is called near miss. For example, in the picture you see is that the chain has broken and the weight has fallen down and it didn't fall on these two people and it is a near miss. But going into an accident, actually it falls on them. So the thing is that we have to be very careful to see that the unsafe acts, which is going to be one of the biggest things, has to be eliminated. Otherwise, we will be having a chance to go into accidents. We won't be helping means our loved ones walk into a disaster or an incident or an accident. Well, so we can understand that in the unsafe conditions, engineering aspect is one of the critical thing in removing the unsafe conditions, because anywhere there is an improvement in the 10 years from the in our engineering expertise of the different branches of engineering, so many things have come. There was a time there was no mobile phones, there was no satellite phones. The communication engineering has developed from Bell's times to the mobile phones to the sat phones today. We have so many today gadgets, the gadgetry has changed. So the unsafe conditions are improving, but the unsafe act still continues, and it continues as a major part in which we as a generation who are supposed to look after the safety of the engineering aspects of the industry, of the academy, of the society, have a great role to play. So the thing is that now we will go into what is a disaster. So what we have to understand that what is a disaster, and well, for the people to understand who are etymologically knowing that where does the disaster word comes into the origin? Well, it is a French word, disaster. It came as a combination of two words. One is bad, this means, and aster means a star. So in the earlier times, it was thought that a bad or evil star was considered to be a disaster, and that is only the origin, how that word came into the normal vocabulary of ours. But the disaster definitions, the disasters are things which are being looked world around. The UN and the United Nations have been conducting so many programs and trying to bring the world nations to see that the disaster risk is reduced. So we will go into another definition of what is a disaster by the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. It's a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to the hazardous events interacting with conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity leading to one or more of the following: human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts. So any serious disruption in any of the things on a large scale can be considered as a disaster. The WHO, another premium body, defines disaster as a sudden ecological phenomenon of sufficient magnitude to require external assistance. Because in a disaster, the communities are not able to cope up with the sudden phenomena of disruption. So these are things in a disaster what we normally know. Well, as of now in Kerala, we know the disasters. We are living in a time of disaster too. And as you can very well know that we are in the end stages, it is told that we are in the end stages of the pandemic called COVID. It's a disaster which has seen the world over. So it is also a disaster, a natural disaster, a pandemic is with the spreading the world over. So the thing is that, and today you and me are not talking directly in front of each other because of a disaster. And it has a magnitude that we are having the assistance of each other to go over the disaster. Well, why does the disaster risk matters is one of the things. We have in the year, for example, there is some statistics that says that in the year 2015, there are statistics after that, there were 346 reported disasters worldwide in which around 22,000 people lost their lives. 98.6 million people were affected worldwide. This is regarding the UN report. I am only just quoting some reports or some authentic UN reports. So in India, there was 19 reported disasters in that year itself, and around 16 to 17 million people were affected. So disaster risks are so huge. So many people are affected, so many economy is affected, so many money is gone. Well, in 1980 to 99, and the study says at one point around you see that in around 20 years or 2 decades, around 2 million people, around 1 to 1.19 million people were killed in disasters. The number of deaths in between the next 19 years, if you see, is at 1.23 million. You can clearly see that in the first 2 decades and the 2 decades, the number of disaster deaths have increased. There are fatalities in spite of the progress of engineering, in spite of the progress of the science, in spite of the progress of many faculties of our understanding of the disaster, safety engineering, the number of deaths have increased over the years. One global assessment report says that the global average annual loss is increasing to around 405 billion by 2030. Is much more than the GDP of many countries put together. So thing is that we are living in a times of a huge disaster risk. So disaster risk is going to be one of the critical areas in the world of technology, in the world of economics in the coming years. Well, if you see that the United Nations Sentai Framework for Action, Sentai is a place in Japan. The thing is that India is also a part of the UN Sentai Framework for Disaster Action. It is a non-binding agreement between the nations, including India, to comply on a voluntary basis to see that the world faces the disaster together. The action plan which the UN adopted as a Sentai, very popularly known as Sentai Framework. Sentai is a place in Japan. It is for understanding the disaster risk, to strengthen the disaster risk governance, to manage the disaster risk. And we have to invest a lot of money, a lot of technology in the disaster risk reduction for resilience of the community, resilience of the people, and also to enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So this is the UN framework on which all the nations have agreed. These are the 4 priorities on which all the nations in the world are going to work together. Well, the disasters have different scales. If you see that again into that framework has adopted disaster scales to be different. Like for example, a small scale disaster. A small scale disaster, can you say a flash flood? A type of disaster which is going to only affect the local community, which requires assistance beyond the affected community. So the communities nearby has to come and help the affected community. This is a small scale disaster. What is a large scale disaster? Type of disaster in which a country is facing or a society is facing, which requires national or international aid. It's floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, ice winds of a large status or a large scale that needs a national and international assistance. Well, another type of disasters has the frequency of the disasters, frequent and infrequent disasters. For example, the infrequent disaster, you can say that COVID had been an infrequent disaster. The impact of the frequent disasters could be cumulative or become chronic for the country. For example, you know that Kerala, for the last many times, frequently we were having so much illness during the monsoon times. There was Nipah and all those things, but that disasters gave us an impact and they build up a community to face a COVID type disaster. So infrequent disasters and frequent disasters are going to be there in the coming times. So infrequent disasters we know, because for example, the plague was an infrequent disaster as of now, but it was a frequent disaster years back or decades back. There are certain disasters which are slow onset disasters. For example, the drought, desertification, sea level rise, the climate change, epidemic disease. These are slow onset disasters. It may gradually emerge over a time. If you say COVID is also a slow onset disaster because from Wuhan to spread all over the world, it took a small time. Gradually, it became a slow onset disaster. But there are sudden onset disasters which is triggered by a hazardous event that emerges quickly or unexpectedly, like tsunamis. The world has seen the tsunami, the chemical explosion, the critical infrastructure failure, the terrorism threats, a sudden onset disasters. So depending on the disaster scale also, depending upon how that disaster happens frequently and all those, the Sentai framework has distributed the disasters into 5 sets like small scale, large scale, frequent and infrequent, slow onset disaster, and a sudden onset disaster. Well, if you say there are types of disasters, what are the different types of disasters we face? Well, normally we know there are natural disasters and man-made disasters or technological disasters we call. In the natural disasters, we know there are so many geological disasters, hydrological disasters like floods, hurricanes, tsunamis. Climatological disasters are there. For example, storms, thunderstorms, lightnings, and so many disasters may come, lightnings and fires. Meteorological disasters are there. Biological disasters are there. Space disasters are there. Space disasters like a meteorite falling onto the earth and many things. So natural disasters has been there from the times immemorial. But there are certain types of natural disasters in the modern world that is also the focus, like food insecurity. There is a disaster of food security in hunger in different parts of the world. There is a type of natural disasters called epidemics and pandemics. So epidemic is epidemic like when the COVID-19 is a disease that is going to affect a large number of people within a community, population or region. When COVID-19 was limited to Wuhan or China, it was an epidemic. But once that epidemic has spread over multiple countries and continents, it became a pandemic. So these are the natural disasters that the world is facing still now. But on the other hand, we also have man-made and technological disasters also. The environmental degradation that is happening, the pollution, air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, plastic pollution, e-waste pollution, terrorism. Terrorism is another type of man-made technological disasters. We see wars, terrorism, accidents. So many industrial accidents are happening. So this is also another type of disasters that we are going to face in the coming times and is already facing in this decade. Well, if we see the calendars of our time, the natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more severe. Some estimates are saying that in the last 10, 15 years, from 1995 to 2015 itself, 4.1 billion worldwide were injured, left homeless, required emergency assistance because of weather-related disasters. So the frequency of disasters, unfortunately, is getting more frequent. The nature is challenging us more. There are many reasons of it. We are interfering with the natures where the human beings are interfering more into the natural cycle of the order. So definitely natural disasters are going to be happen. And the frequencies and severity of the natural disasters are there. Like in Kerala, we are now used to the floods of a very unimaginable level. Landslides are there. It was not a phenomenon a decade back. So the natural disasters are becoming more frequent and severe as of date. Well, as the common natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, landslides, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, dust storms, floods, droughts, wildfires, sinkholes. There are so many common natural disasters that we have heard of, we know, we have learned of in our many times in the media, in our academics, in our libraries, in our net, and all those things. Some of the pictures may be very familiar because these are some of the disasters that happened around us, the landslides, the flood, and all those things. India's average annual economic loss to the disasters is estimated to be around a staggering $9.8 billion. So you can understand that how much money, human lives, economy is getting shattered for a developing country like India too. So we have technocrats, we have engineers, we have upcoming science activists has to see that the disasters have to be managed. We can't control the disasters, but we have to see that the disaster management part is going to be a part in which there are new challenges forthcoming, and we have to find solutions to that challenges of the disaster management. Some more statistics I would like to present is that we see over the decades, the number of people who are losing their life in the floods have been increased. More than 1,500 people are losing their lives every year. Around 15,000, 350 in the last decade we have lost. So the thing is that 1,500 people per year, which on a daily average, we are losing more than 5 to 6 people to floods in our country itself. So the thing that these disasters are challenging the engineers, the scientific community to see that we control, have more better management measures of disasters. On the other hand, there are man-made disasters also like socio-technical disaster, warfare, technological disasters, transportation of chemical disasters, structural collapse, production failures. Warfare is an international disaster. National disasters are there. Conventional and non-conventional. So many man-made disasters are also part along with the natural disasters. So our decade, our times are such that we live in the time of disasters, and so disaster management is evolving as one of the most critical part of engineering and management, where we have to find measures to see that these disasters are overcome or managed. Well, going into the man-made disasters, one of the most famous disaster in the world's history of industry is the Bhopal gas tragedy of 2nd, 3rd December 1984. Many of you may not be born at that time, but it is considered to be the world's most dangerous industrial tragedy till date, in which so many people have lost, and with all our engineering, with all our aspects, we were not able to save lives. Well, it was not that the disasters have stopped after our technology has improved. You may be remembering the Visakhapatnam Stirling gas leak was sent panics across the nation, across the TV screens, across our media in the this year itself. In the September 2010, you see a deep water horizontal drilling rig explosion sending oil into the river is in the US. So the thing is that be it a developing country, be it a non-developing, developed country, man-made disasters are still happening on a huge criteria. Like if you go to analyze the Bhopal gas tragedy is also known as Bhopal disaster. It was a gas leak. On the night of 2nd and 3rd of December from the Union Carbide India pesticide plant in Bhopal, one of the world's most dangerous chemicals, methyl isocyanate, was leaked out. Around 5 lakh people were exposed. This toxic substance made in the morning of that 3rd December and the night of 2nd into the small towns located near the plant. The estimates are still varying on the death toll. The official immediate death toll was around 2,000, about 2,000. The official estimates are still more. It remains as a blot on the engineering abilities of the scientific community as on today, why we are not able to control such type of disasters. Well, Bhopal disaster is not a single disaster. There have been so many industrial accidents and disasters that have shook the world. If you go into the history, if you go into internet and see Flixborough, 1974, Severso in Italy, 1976, Mexico City, 1984, Bhopal in 1984, again Chernobyl, Russia, nuclear plant, 1986, Piper Alpha plant in USA, 1988, Pasadena in Texas, Channelview plant in Texas, Pemex in Mexico, Petrobras in Brazil, Tolos in France. You see the fatalities that have happened, the millions and the millions of money in dollars that we have lost over these accidents. So it is a very challenge to the engineering world, engineering community, be it any type of engineer, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, instrumentation engineer, chemical engineer, safety engineer, computer engineer, civil engineer, to see that there are technologies developing to see that we manage even the industrial accidents or industrial disasters in the coming times. So it is going to be a challenge for the coming times, that industrial accidents, how to manage this industrial accidents. So disaster management is going to be one of the bigger things in the industry, in the nation, in the economy, in the development, even of at the ground level, from a family to a nation, from a family to the world. Disaster management is one of the areas of science in which the focus is going to be in the coming times. Well, if you see that a Japanese ship, Japanese are considered to be one of the best having engineering to their ship, ran the fuel. There was an accident and the fuel got lost in the island of Mauritius, and the state of environmental emergency was declared only in 2020. So this is a picture released by the French Defense Ministry. You see the ecological environmental damage which has created. There are no technologies available to remove the oil spills to the last drop still available. So there are challenges. So these are some of the countries, like Japan is one of the countries, and Japan is one of the countries having best technologies in the world. Still, industrial disasters and this type of accidents are happening that are threatening and challenging us to see that the disaster management measures are taken in a better way. Well, one thing I want to focus is that why a chemical disaster is becoming very unique. The focus, there are 4 P's. There is a unique thing about a chemical disaster. A chemical disaster is having a potential to spread across a place, and that is a very dangerous thing. It won't subside to a critical single place. It has a potential to spread across. It will affect the people of the plant. It will affect the people outside. A gas leak can affect up to any place. Even that leak or a fire can create a pollution and a permanent damage to the environment of that thing. We have a price to pay. The economy of that company, the economy of that place, the economy of that society, the economy of that nation may be damaged in a chemical disaster. For example, still Bhopal is reeling under the damages of that chemical disaster of that 1984. Generations to come will have to face that price, pay that price. So we have to see that the chemical disasters are one of the areas where the focus of man-made disasters are going to be. It is not that chemical disasters are not again happening. Some of the examples like Daldikan River in Russia in 2016 turned red. There was a catastrophic oil spill in Russia in Siberia 2020. In 2015 in Colorado, in Animas River, Durango, near border of Mexico and US, it turned yellow. The thing is that the industrial disasters, spills, oil spills, chemical spills, in spite of the best technology, these are from some of the best technological advanced plants in the world. They are not novices in the business of technology or engineering. So it means that disaster management is something of a science which is improving year by year, time by time, minute by minute, with new advances, new technologies, new thoughts, new processes. And that is the challenge that is coming to us. But we can say in a disaster, there will be what? A phenomenon or event which constitutes a trauma for a population or environment of a particular thing. There will be a vulnerable point area. For example, like in the Stirling case, you see that people are running with the people. The phenomena was to Visakhapatnam. It was a traumatizing event. But what is happening is that in the case of a disaster, the local and the surrounding resources won't be enough to cope with the problems created by that phenomena of a disaster. And that is why disaster management, you have to source so many streams of help from different streams, different engineering, different people, different nations, and maybe different communities too. And that is why the challenges of disasters is an interesting thing too. Well, in any traditional risk and threat of any disasters, we know the natural phenomena, earthquakes, cyclones, eruptions, tsunamis are still the man-made counterparts are also no less. Industrial accidents, gas leak, oil spills, chemical seepages are also happening. They are again continuing to lose. Continuous loss of casualties, economic, social gain, damage to environment are there. Certainly true that we have learned to cope with problems to some extent, but more has to be done. The truth is that we have not eliminated or contained the disasters. We can't also. But the long-standing threats, we ourselves also have new risks by the part of our technology, by the art of climate change, by interfering, by the pollution and all those things. And the threat is another threat that is that the population migrations to the areas where there are employments, to the industrial places, to the areas where people can live. And increasing population alone also force people to live in disaster-prone areas which previously would not have been regarded as habitable. So the man-made conditions are also increasing the risk and threat of disasters to a more human populace. So there is an unacceptable pressure on the world population to see that for sustenance and to meet its words and to meet the both ends, we have to bring and see that the disaster management challenges are going to be met in a more fruitful way in the coming times. Well, India is also no more less disaster prone. If you see the disaster risk in India, our vulnerability to disaster risk is considerable on account of our geophysical location and our socio-economic profile. We are a developing nation, so our profile is also an important role in our vulnerability to disaster risk. 85% of India's population lies in the India geophysically lies in a probability zone of a single or a multiple disasters. 58% of our India's area fall in high seismic zones, means where the earthquake probability is quite high. So earthquake can happen in around 60% of our land mass anytime. Approximately 14 million hectares of our land, around 12% of our land is prone to floods and river erosion. We have a big coastline of which we can be proud of, but out of our 7,500 kilometer long coastline, a long coastline area is prone to cyclone and tsunamis because of our oceans. We are as a peninsula, we are as an oceans, peninsula projecting into the oceans. We are having Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal around us. So we are prone to cyclones and tsunamis. One of the most economic threats and a disaster, 68% of the cultivable area is susceptible to drought. And of the India's 35 states and union territories, 27 are prone to one or more these hazards. So nowhere in India can say that we are less disaster risk. The disaster risk is huge anywhere in India. So these are some of the statistics that have been published by the government of India in the disaster management of India by the Ministry. Disaster management of India is looked under by the Ministry of Home Affairs for that. It is being controlled by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So there is a lot of documentation into that. If you go and see what are the disaster-prone areas, there are so many good data which is available to understand the disaster risk of the country, the disaster risk of the state, the disaster risk of the place we live in. Well, coming to the disaster risk of Kerala, we are also no less disaster risk place. Kerala is also one of the densely, as you know, that we are one of the most densely populated states in the country. In fact, we are the 8th most densely populated state in the country. 14% of our state is flood prone. Another 14% of our state is landslide prone. So the thing is that 60%, 55 to 60% of our coastline, we have coastal hazards. So in Kerala, we have a lot of disaster risks. We have 3 seismic zones in the state itself. We fall into the zone 3. We have a probability of seismic activity or earthquake activity. The lightning is so much in Kerala, and in the coming times also, we see that lightning is increasing year by year. There is a good number of fatalities because of the lightning every year. Around average, it is said that around 70 people die of lightning every year. Well, we are one of the states which being very developed, 65 out of the 10,000 vehicles are prone to accidents in our state. The LPG is being transported by roads in our state. Around 45% of the LPG that we use at homes, industry are transported by roads. There is a variability of weather patterns that we see and the global warming is evident in our state. We see flash floods, we see landslide, we see every day in the media, we look around to see, are we on a red alert, are we on yellow alert, are we on orange alert? So the thing is that the variability of weather patterns and the global warming is evident in this state. So but in any disasters, we can see what are the general effects of any disasters. Generally, there will be a loss of life, there will be injury, there will be damage and destruction of property, there will be damage and destruction of production, be it crops, be it industry. There will be a lot of reduction in our production capabilities. The lifestyle is disrupted. Your lifestyle, our lifestyle is disrupted by the COVID pandemic itself. Even this loss of livelihood will be there. Be it floods, be it COVID, the loss of livelihood. There's a disruption of essential services. Essential services till we considered few years back as permanent and are disrupted in a large scale. There is a damage to the national infrastructure. Many places have changed their face because infrastructure is damaged. There is a disruption in the governmental systems. The working systems, the filing systems, the meeting systems, everything has been disrupted. There is a huge national economic loss we are paying for the disasters. and also a psychological and psychological and sociological effect after disaster. People who have lost their lives, people who have lost their livelihoods, there is nothing to look forward. So there is a great effect after any disaster. So these are common things which happen in any disaster. So now comes an important thing, that how can we reduce risk? Well, disaster risk is widely recognized as a consequence of interaction between three things. One is the hazard, one is the exposure, and one is the vulnerable. We have understood that the word, when we are saying we are at a risk, we are have hazards, the exposure may be there, we are vulnerable to it. So we have to increase and increase our ability to monitor and forecast hazards. That is one part to reduce risk. So if anything of this is reduced, hazard or exposure or vulnerability, we can reduce our risk, and that is the basic on which the disaster management is working on. So if we have an increased awareness of the hazards that the communities face, we can reduce the exposure. For example, we all are using masks. Why are we using masks? Because we are trying to reduce the COVID exposure. We are trying to reduce, we are increasing every time you use your mobile phone, the awareness of the using masks, sanitizer comes. Because the government is trying to impose increasing the awareness so that the exposure is reduced, so that risk is reduced. Vulnerability, what is the vulnerability? The greatest benefit by reducing the vulnerability of natural hazards. We are vulnerable. There is a certain limit that we can do to vulnerability. Because the vulnerability is that if we have flood alarming systems, landslide alarms, seismic alarms, we can remove that people from that vulnerable areas. So the thing is that any disaster risk in the disaster management is reduced by either reducing the hazard or reducing the exposure and vulnerabilities. The thing is that our engineering expertise is to improve how we can forecast or monitor the hazards, how to reduce the exposure of the communities to the hazard, how can we make them less vulnerable. So that is the only way we can reduce the disaster risk in the coming times. Well, what is disaster management or emergency preparedness, as we say? Disaster management is nothing but an applied science which seeks by the systematic observation and analysis of disasters to improve the measures so that we can prevent, we can mitigate an emergency response and recovery. These are the principles on which this applied science are being done. When we say we have prepared for an emergency, you are preparing for an emergency called exams, you make a plan. You build a kit. Your kit would be that you will be learning books, you will be taking things. So you build up a kit to face that emergency. Then you will be informed that on a particular date you will be examined or you will be tried. In the same way, that is the preparedness you do for a writing exam. In the same way, for a disaster, we make a plan, we build a kit of action, we are informed, we be informed of the disaster, then we know that we are prepared. So disaster management is that applied science of this observation and measures to improve the prevention, mitigation, preparedness, emergency response, and recovery part. Well, coming to a Disaster Management Act, it also means prevention of danger or the threat of a disaster. That is also part of disaster management. Reduction of risk or severity or its consequences a part. Capacity building of ours to increase the capability to face disaster management. The preparedness to deal with any disaster, prompt response. We need a response emergency to any threatening disasters or a situation. For example, we have a disaster of a war, we should have a prompt response. For an emergency chemical damage, we should have a prompt response. So disaster management is also looking into that. Assessing the severity or the magnitude of it, we have to assess the severity of it, how far it is affected, what is the magnitude of the disaster. Evacuation, rescue and relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction. So the section 2 of the Disaster Management Act, which is the umbrella law which governs all the disaster management in India, says these are all the measures which are necessary for a disaster management. So in short, this disaster management is helping us from risk prevention or now where we are. The challenges of facing a disaster to be where we need to be. So we have to live its uncertainty. We have to prevent the risks. So disaster management is only just a road to ensure that the risk is prevented. We live with the uncertainty of a disaster. The responses are better. There is an integrated enabling of the resources to see that we sustain disasters and we have a regenerative capacity. This is one of the drawings from the United Nations, which says that disaster management, disaster response is a travel from our disaster response to risk prevention, somewhere where we all are standing. And we are using our technology to improve this risk-informed systems-based approaches and decision makings. So this is basically what is the disaster management is. Well, if you say what is the legislation, we may be knowing that under the DM Act, the collector has ordered this. Under the DM Act, the collector has given holidays for those schools. Under the DM Act, the collector has given for colleges, institutions. So what is DM Act? Or the Disaster Management Act 2005. In India, the Disaster Management Act 2005 lays down institutional and coordination mechanism for effective disaster management at national, state, district, and local levels. So, as mandated by this Disaster Act, this Government of India has created a multi-tiered institutional system called NDMA, which is headed by the Prime Minister, the State Disaster SDMA, headed by the Chief Minister, the District Disaster Management headed by the collectors, and co-chaired by the local bodies. So any disaster, this disaster chain is going to be working, and it's basically because it is by rule and by act of the government, of our government. So coming to the, as we told that an NDMA is headed by the Prime Minister, so you can see the disaster management in India is looked after directly by the Prime Minister. So you can very well understand that how much focus the government is giving to any disasters happening anywhere in India, anytime. Then the setting up of the institutions have created an environment for this disaster management throughout the state, district level to many places. There are certain policies, plan, guidelines of disaster management, and we have an ethos of prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and response. So if we say what is our disaster legislation, it is based on prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and response. And you will be surprised to know that India's National Disaster Response Force is the world's single largest force dedicated to disaster response. So see that how much government, how much our state government, how much our national government has focused to see that the citizens of this nation, citizens of this state are facing the disaster response in a better way. India's NDRF is one of the single largest force. In Kerala, it is looked after by the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority. Well, coming to the disaster management cycle, how to manage a disaster. If you say if you have to manage a disaster, there are two phases of a disaster management cycle. So one, the yellow part is after the event. So there is a part before the event. So if we see the green part, there are two steps. One is mitigation, one is preparing for facing a disaster. These two steps happen before a disaster. But there are two steps which happens after a disaster. How do we respond in a disaster? How to recover after disaster? So definitely this is the disaster management cycle that we are going to focus on. This is the cycle of a disaster management anywhere in the world, how to face a disaster. Well, regarding the phases of disaster management, as we are already told, there are two phases. One is the mitigation phase. And in the mitigation phase, you will see the public education awareness, hazard and vulnerability assessment, improved infrastructure is there to face a disaster. In the preparedness phase, we have the national emergency, telecommunication, response plans, training and exercise, early warning systems, standard operating procedures to face prepare. In a response phase, we have a disaster, we have to see the communication and coordination are there to save lives, to save economy, to save the nation's interests. And there is a recovery phase after a disaster in which we have to restore the telecommunications, the infrastructure very fast we have to improve the lives, we have to recover and rehabilitate the services. So these are the different phases of a disaster management in which we would be moving around many times. So to have a better understanding of the disaster management policy principles of prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and development, prevention is nothing but measures we are taking, like we are opening the dams to see that the floods are not happening. Nowadays, we see that this dam is going to be open, that dam is going to be open, constructing a dam to see that a damage, a disaster is not happening. So these are the preventive measures. So what are the mitigation measures? Mitigation measures are the actions taken to reduce the effects of a disaster. Like we put sandbags to see that the errors are, means the riverbeds are not eroded. We put sandbags or rocks to see that the ends of the lands are not eroded. We take efforts to reduce we take many actions to reduce the effects of a disaster. That is called the mitigation steps. Normally, we have building codes, we have many acts. The Coastal Act is there to see that the building codes to reduce the damage and loss so that we don't build buildings very near to coastlines. So there are so many acts, so many building codes to reduce the damage and loss in the event of an earthquake and cyclones. Well, preparedness. We have one of the best disaster response forces in our country. They respond rapidly and effectively to disaster situations, but they are trained. There are so many mock drills. They keep inventories of resources. There are disaster plans. They do mock drills. They are trained. They say on-site mock drills, off-site mock drills. There is a lot of preparedness going for a disaster management policy that we are going to implement. Then response. Once a disaster happens, the response measures are usually to be taken. It is to reduce the disaster impact. You see that the disaster NDRF comes into force now. We see there are so many disasters happening around. You see the NDRF personnel, the police personnel, the state security personnel, the state paramilitary forces. So many response teams come to see that the disaster management response are effective. The major aim in which they are directed is to save life, to protect property, and deal with immediate damage and other effects caused by the disaster. They try to stop the cascading effects of a disaster. That's also an immediate response, because first response is very critical in any disaster. We have seen in the floods of the Kerala also the first responders response is very critical. Well, coming to the recovery part, the process by which the communities and the nations recover, it is a great function, because the loss of people's lives, livelihoods are there. To return back to proper levels of functioning of a society is very difficult. Sometimes it may take years. For example, in the last 2 years, even after COVID, we are not able to come into a normal lifestyle. The floods have affected so many parts and ravaged many parts of the Kerala. The life is still to be recovered. The government is taking so much steps to restore and reconstruct, but normally it may take time. So the recovery part after any disaster is a very critical part, but it is one of the most important things in a disaster management policy principle. Then comes a part of development. The progressive and the advancement and modernization of societies. As a part of it, we see that how we can develop measures to see that the disasters effects are reduced, how developments are science, how developments of technology, how development of infrastructure is going to help in better disaster management. So this development is a continuous activities of advancement and modernization of the engineering part or the technical part or the infrastructure part to see that we very effectively deal with disaster management. So as we know that in any disasters, for example, we will go across to one of the major disasters that our state has faced and to have a better understanding of the principles of our disaster management, how it was actually worked out in the last Kerala First 2018. We have to define certain aspects. We can know that it is vital to have some key aspects in any disasters. For any disaster, there will be some possible threats. There will be some resources available. There should be some organizational requirements, planning needs should be there. There should be certain actions taken to a management cycle, and we have to train people to face. These are the key aspects in any disaster which we are going to face. So we are now going to see into how how the Kerala faced the last floods of 2018 with the disaster management principles that we have seen, so that we have a better understanding of the disaster management principles in general. For example, in the Kerala floods of 2018, it was one of the Kerala's very damaging severe flooding after 1924. We have never seen such a great floods all across Kerala. It was severe flooding in India, southern Kerala. It led to more about 480 people displaced, about 1.8 million people around 93%, around 1.5 to 1. Out of the 1.12 lakh people, flood affected houses were in the urban areas of Alappuzha, Ernakulam, Kottayam, Pathanamthitta, Thrissur, Wayanad. It has been cleaned and rendered fit for use after the floods. So the thing is that we see that Kerala floods was one of the damaging floods that we have seen in the last few decades, or maybe in the last half century. Kerala has never witnessed such damaging floods. So let us understand by few pictures that we have taken from various media, various print and online media, to see that how we responded to a disaster. Because there are certain learnings from this our disaster response that the world and the communities have to learn in how we faced the Kerala floods of 2018. As you know that any flood threats, long, short or no warning, depending on the type, would be the floods, there won't be any usual warning. So the flood threat characteristics are like this. The speed may be gradual. Some areas were flooded suddenly, some were gradual. There may be seasonal patterns, but there may or may not be seasonal patterns also. Major effects are that there will be land inundation will be there, erosion will be there. There should be isolation of communities. Large-scale evaluation of population has to be done. These are the needs, normal things that happen in any floods that happen in Kerala too. So what are the threats, special problems in a disaster management that we face during a flood? Is that the difficulty of access and movement. We find it very difficult to have access and movement during floods because everything will be flooded, everything should be underwater, the normal roads, normal airport, even our airport during Kerala floods were underwater. So the rescue of the normal people and the differently abled people are also difficult. Why differently abled people's rescue also become difficult? Because 15% of the global population are of people with our differently abled. So the thing is that the rescue of the normal differently able becomes a challenge. There will be medical and health difficulties will be there from any threats. There will be sanitation threats, there will be E. coli threats, there will be so many diseases coming up during a flood. Evacuating a large population is a very difficult task during any floods. There will be a loss of relief supplies. Large-scale relief supplies may be required for the till next crop harvest because there won't be any production facilities. So there is so many threat areas in any floods that Kerala also saw in 2018. So we will go through some purchase of Kerala flood 2018, how large masses people were marooned in many places. They were in big buildings, so many people, so many areas got flooded. The life was totally disrupted. There were no roads. Some people had to be airlifted. So the thing is that the pictures this is just a revisit to some of the pictures we wish we never see in our lifetimes. But unfortunately, we have to go through these pictures to see the effects of that disasters and how the youth of Kerala, the people of Kerala, the community of Kerala responded to understand how we can cope with a disaster in a better way and what are the takeaways from that disasters. A lot of things, landslides in the disasters in the recent times. Lot of disruption happens from our normal things. There won't be transport available, nothing would be working, means large amount of people had to be evacuated. These are going to be some grim pictures of these hazards. You see the airport is not Cochin airport, which was not being able to be used. It was flooded, so we don't have supplies coming in different places. The tarmac was flooded. The houses were damaged. The people had to be airlifted. So our defense force, our India forces have to come in because airport was closed. So the thing is that a large scale evaluation was a challenge during the floods. So these are some of the threats that we actually faced during the floods. The loss of property, so many properties, people's precious things, livelihood are lost, shops, establishments, their future, their tomorrow is just lost because of the floods. And we can imagine the pain of the people. If we just remember, if we lose our home in a flash of a second, the property, our livelihood, what will we do? The psychological impact, the physiological impact that is going to be there. But this is the reality of any flood. There will be property loss, homes loss, livelihood loss. Big evacuation measures of so many population by the rescue forces. The pets have to be rescued. The people have to be rescued. They have to be airlifted. They have to be taken in the canopies. So there's a lot of rescue efforts. So many evacuation of good people, healthy people and unhealthy people, skilled people, disabled people, normal people in the floods. So we see through these pictures that this is one of the challenges that come during any disaster, once a disaster response happens. In the response of any floods, a lot of action will be happening on the ground. The youth collectively came to the rescue of the flooded. One of the best things that I've seen Kerala, surprising the old has to be carried out from the to the safe places. So the people, the young people like you in the many places of the Kerala, as the Steffi sir also taught, they came in physical and by technology to help people and rescue people during the flood. That is one of the things that has changed even the dynamics of flood management and disaster management, thinking that you are given disaster management classes to enable and to ensure that the coming youth is getting ready for any disaster services in this nation or our state. You see, the youth was there in rescue of pets, rescue of people in sowing places, in rescue of the very diseased people, sick people who can't move, who are immobile. So there were so many activities that used to be happening during a rescue operations like a floods. It may be in a different sort during it an earthquake, maybe different sort, but we are going through the floods to understand the different responses, activities, the management cycles of a disaster that we are going through when a disaster strikes us. One more casualty in a flood or a disaster is that drinking water won't be there. Good drinking water has to be there. There won't be food. People have to be provided food. Community kitchens were open. People have to be. So many people were helping. So many resources came in. That resources have to be distributed. So many kids have to be saved. So many young mothers. So many young people have to be saved. They have to be rescued from places. They are marooned in different places. So there are so many activities that happen in parallel while a disaster strikes. And the thing is that, as we told, as we understood by these slides, homes and livelihoods were lost, IDs were lost, rebuilding businesses are a challenge, reopening of schools, cleaning of houses, searching for household items to come back to lives, sheltering the displaced, avoiding health hazards, restoring clean water and electricity is huge dimensional work during a disaster. And we have seen in our floods also these effects. So how to go about that with an engineering expertise is going to challenge all the young engineers and the technologists in the coming days. There is a lot of scope for you people to help in a disaster related action. It may be in providing and disseminating warnings, early warning systems, rescue and search operations. You have to build systems to see surveying, assessing and reporting disaster effects, treating and caring of victims, clearing debris and rehabilitating roads, airfields, railway systems, ports, key areas, providing emergency food and water supplies, providing logistics, providing shelter, evacuating individuals, groups, communities, livestock, providing health and sanitation measures, restoring essential services like communications, water and supply. These are the scope of help that is going to put you people into action in face of any disaster in the coming decades. So the thing is that we have to have two phases attacks of a disaster plan. One is by technology, by innovating methods, by innovating, by getting more preparation for it, and we also have to physically see that we go and help in a disaster-related actions. But there were so many learnings from this Kerala floods of 2018. As you know, that this Kerala, the last great flood of 99, or as we say in the Malayalam month, was in 1924 English calendar year. Well, as conditions turned hostile in Kerala, there was so much, a new band of heroes came silently. It was one of the most surprising things in the history of disaster management worldwide. So many young men and women, normally they are termed as a millennial generation who are used to the mobile phones. They came in hordes to become the saviors and helping hands to those who are affected by the floods. These Kerala floods of 2018 and after that also COVID show it did found a new youth and a millennial generation came up with better ideas, better ways to emerge as a new band of heroes, as a new silent barriers to our disaster management. And the world has taken note of it, not only in India, but the world over. It has the term praise. It is being looked after with praise that the first responders have to be from the local community, and the youngsters, the persons who are able to help are going to be the first responders. These Kerala floods also have changed the way the disaster management principles are going to be coined in the coming times. Day and night, we have seen this young men and people ease traffic, evacuating hospitals, carrying people in deep water. Another frontline barriers that surprising came is the fishermen of Kerala. People whom we have never considered to be a frontline barriers in a catastrophe or a disaster. So this never ever seen before superheroes of this Malayali community of these youngsters, these frontline barriers of fishermen. They were the soul and the pivot of a rescue operations in the disasters. They became the first responders. And that the world has taken note that the millennial generation was were in the forefront. You see, the millennial generation was happy to go ahead and see. So there is a normally worldwide now the disaster management principles are rewritten to see that the young force, the young generation is going to play a great role in being the first responders in two ways, by the technology innovation and also by the physical labor and physical health that they are going to be the responding for a disaster. So we see that a lot of youngsters have helped in Kerala flood 2018 from the response time to the recovery phase. You see in the length of the breadth of the Kerala, we have seen so many youngsters coming forward, so many young people, so many people who are not like frontline warriors like fishermen, who stake their lives. So the first response, the disaster management, first responders were a new way. Like you see some of the very pictures in which they became the human shield for people to step over them to be rescued. So the Kerala fishermen, they played a major role. So it also brought into the new philosophy of disaster management that the responders of any disasters from will be the locals. They are the better equipped, trained. The locals will be the better equipped, giving an understanding of the profile of the land, the landscape of the land. They are the better people to be the first responders. The role of the first responders in a disaster has been defined after this Kerala floods of 2018 to ensure that in the disaster response, we have a new generation of responders to as first responders to any disasters. Well, after the disaster phase, also for the cleaning phase, to see that the drugs and the medicines are distributed, the aids are distributed for cleaning of the various buildings. We saw that generation of youngsters like you all were in the forefront. So we have seen that in the response part, in the recovery part, in the disaster mitigation part, there is a great role for youngsters to play. For all the aspirants, all the students, all the young generation has a great role to play in face of any disaster. Well, in the disasters also, rebuilding after a disaster is a great difficult thing. You lose hopes. But still there, we can see the millennial generation was again in the forefront. They were there in cleaning houses, they were there in distributing the aids, they went home to home, collected data. So the thing is that, so we see that the disaster management cycle, how the youngsters have come into the forefront, and by these pictures we will have a clear picture on how they have a role to play in any disasters. The Kerala floods of 2018 have clearly shown the world, clearly shown the decision makers of disaster management that young generation is going to play a critical role in disaster management principles in any time in the coming decades. Well, the government has also taken so many countermeasures like flood control, runoff regulators, diversion structures, upgrades, dams. These all are taken after general countermeasures have been taken. Well, land use regulations, building regulations, forecasting, monitoring, warning system, relocating population, emergency equipment, public awareness. These many things have come as countermeasures by the government also after the flood threats. So in a flood threat, as we have seen, four critical things become. One is the risk knowledge, how much vulnerable we are to that hazard. What is the monitoring and warning systems? How to disseminate and communicate in a disaster, and what is our capability. So these are the general measures in any flood threats. So normally now we have seen that how the youth has to see. Youth has a role in any disaster response like in our last Kerala floods. Now comes to the last phase of our role of engineers in disaster management. I understand from our Steffi sir and the professors have interacted is that the engineers from different communities, like different streams, like mechanical, electrical, electronics, computers, civil, safety, are going to be a part, and they all have a great role to play in any disaster management schemes of the future. For action in any defining disaster threats, we have to identify the hazards, we have to assess the vulnerability of settlements, communities, and we have to evaluate the risks. And when we say risks, there is two things. One is the frequency and magnitude. So depending on the risks, we have to have a plan of action. So what is the plan of action that engineering community is going to do? So what is the disaster management necessitates that the professional approach integrating the engineering expertise is to happen. So there are new initiatives for building resilience to provide opportunities for professional engineers to actively engage in proactive services. We have to see that the performance of existing and the new infrastructure in relation to hazard imports of excessive magnitude during normal service life of assets needs to be reevaluated, and proactive preparedness based on improved risk assessments and widely increased resilience capabilities needs to be developed. This is a task done by engineers. There is avenues for professional engineers to develop more formal communication with emergency service providers and general public opportunities for engagement with forensic assessments, strengthening and rehabilitating existing infrastructure, as well as in preparedness, response, recovery, and reconstructing activities. Over a longer term, the engineering profession should develop a common understanding for dealing proactively with emergency and disaster issues rather than retrospectively. They have a proactive role in a disaster management in the coming times. So what are the different challenges? The challenges to engineers, the new engineers that have come into these engineering studies are that you are the person to design and construct flood-prone building structures, earthquake-prone building structures. You have to design new ways, new construction methods, new building materials have to be there. There are a lot of activities happening by drones. You see that drones are used for now warfare. Drones are used for rescue efforts in fire. Drones are used for medical efforts. Drones are used for mapping areas. Drones are used to help satellites build better pictures. Drones are used for GIS mapping system, that is Global Information Systems mapping system. So many drones are going to be one of the things that are going to change the transport. In the coming times of disaster management, drones are going to be one of the equipments that is going to be having a great role in a disaster management scheme. So the mechanical engineers have to see how the capacity of the drones can be increased, how they can carry bigger payloads, how they can carry heavy payloads. The electrical engineers have to see that how the battery structures are working so that they take long sorties. They have to go longer areas into disaster, come back. The wireless communications is going to be there. How wireless communications are going to be between the drone and the ground stations. How satellite phones, how technologies of wireless methods are going to be used to communicate with the disaster response team, disaster management team, the disaster front responders. So the instrumentation engineers, the electronics engineers, electronics and communication engineers, the computer engineers have to develop systems, wireless systems, wired systems, SAT systems to see that the new type of mechanisms, phones, gadgets are available with our disaster management teams. Amphibian vehicles may be a gemstone dreams, but we have to have disasters prone vehicles which can go into any area. For example, we see that we have going to a place of landslide. Normal vehicles can't go there, but you have to develop, mechanical engineers have to develop amphibian vehicles. We have to see that they are leak proof, seal proof. They have to float in water. They have to go in terrains. They don't tilt. The gravity of that vehicles is low. All-terrain vehicles. All-terrain vehicles have to develop. The robotics have to be developed. Rescue robots are coming into use. Some military installations now, rescue robots are being developed. Robotics, artificial intelligence is going to be going to play a great role. Satellite imagery of a certain place, how disaster. For example, in one of the pictures, you see that how a leakage is being spilled over. So for countermeasure, the challenges to the engineering community is to develop new technologies. The technologies that we have learned over this era, over these decades, is not going to help us in facing the threats in the coming times. So it is a challenge to all the engineers listening out to this disaster management in no matter what department. You may be in civil, you may be in electrical, you may be in mechanical, you may be in computer, instrumentation, fire and safety, anything. You have one of the greatest role to play in developing technology, in building up infrastructure in the coming decade for the nation, for the society, for the world. And that is the challenge to the engineers. That is basically the idea of this presentation by your college, your government, and me too. I always wish that some of you out there develop new methods, new challenge, new innovations in the coming times to face disaster management effectively. And that is the challenge that is going to be there. Well, we can say that disaster threat information is another important thing. Every communication is lost, electrical poles are lost, the satellite phones are lost, means the normal BSNL connections, the other connections, telephone connections are there. Our mobiles may not be work, your mobile batteries may not hang for 2-3 days. So you have to have disaster plans. The disaster plans have to be importantly made. You see on one side there is a picture. It's a picture of the forest fire hotspot. So you have to develop better maps. You have to have maps to say the vulnerability in specific cases. So you have to have new methods or programs for mitigation and prevention. You have to see that how large number of people can be evacuated from certain areas in flood-prone areas. Your helicopters should have more payload abilities because your airstrips are not going to work. So you should be able to lift people by drones. You should be able to lift people. You should be able to bring in amphibian vehicles by drones. You should be able to map an area by drone. So disaster threat information is going to be one more challenging area for the aspiring engineers of tomorrow. Well, as we have seen that the different types of assistance, there are so many types of assistance that is expected from you for the youngsters, for the engineering community to give. That is, one is the pre-disaster assistance. That may be in developing plans, in developing technology, in developing formulas, in developing gadgetry. One type of assistance you engineers have to give is assistance in prevention and mitigation steps. Another type of assistance is in the preparedness of the plans. Because in a disaster, when you face a disaster, it is normally seen that many of the plans that we have built won't work. So you have to innovate and prepare new methods. Assistance in response operations. Response operations will need a lot of people. Because once a disaster comes, the response would be different from different segments of people. The normal response of the people would be different in the face of a disaster, because we are facing a person who have faced a disaster. The response has to be reoriented and reworked on, so that your assistants have to come in to see that we plan better assistance in response operations. So many youngsters group have worked in floods, in groups, by ham radios, by WhatsApp groups, and also to see better response in response operations. Recovery program. There are so many recovery programs of the government. A lot of youngsters, a lot of engineering students, a lot of other college students, they helped in the recovery program. In the future development of technology, one of the things that come in crisis is leadership. You have to take leadership role in your area, in your community at times of crisis. And the engineering is going to prepare you to be leaders, because definitely when you are going to industry or going to society, you are going to lead a team. So you should have developed leadership in a crisis conditions or in any managing conditions. Assistance for coordination, assistance of logistics, assistance in information system and community leadership are going to one of the areas in which your assistance would be sorted out by the societies, by the engineering community, by the disaster management teams anytime. Because you are the people who are going to lead the technology into the next decades. And when we see that, like for example, logistics and disaster management is a huge challenge. It's not an easy challenge. From the physical activity of disaster, for example, you see it is to ensure that the right supplies in right quantities, in the right order, in a very good condition, at the right place and at the right time. To coordinate that in a normal time, it's a great challenge in logistics, procurement and delivery. Then to coordinate it during a relief measure and a disaster management is going to be a huge thing, because there won't be any systems. You have to develop systems, you have to sort out things, you have to sort according to the need, you have to sort according to the material, you should ensure that the relief measures are not damaged. So the leadership from you, the technology from you, the computer connectivity from you, the web connectivity from you is going to be the great challenge in the coming times. So coming to the scope of the disaster related actions that is expected from engineers like you, to coming to the end, we are coming into the last two slides. Before that, you can have any questions. One is that directed and coordinating counter disaster measures. It is going to be a disaster related action in which you are going to be in the forefront. Informing and advising the public in the new methodologies. Financially assisting victims immediately is done by the government, but there is a scope for an action for the youngsters. Maintaining the public morale, counseling victims and relatives, controlling and distributing emergency supplies, liaising with the media, rehabilitating crops productions, livelihood, emergency building programs, measures for long-term recovery, applying emergency regulations. So, the scope of disaster-related action for youngsters like you who have come into the engineering community is huge. I can say that in the coming decades, it is going to be one of the most enterprising and more areas where there is going to be a lot of activity in different segments. Once we can see is that how we are developing new methods of satellite, we are developing new movements of transfer. So the role of engineers in innovation of disaster management. is going to be the future of disaster management. Let us be very clear that engineers, no matter from any group, be it any sphere of engineering, be it civil, mechanical, electrical, instrumentation, computer, AI, safety, biomedical, no matter what engineers you are, as practitioners of engineering are the professionals who are going to invent, design, analyze, build, and test machines. You are the people who are going to do these complex systems, complex structures, gadgets, and materials. You are the people to fulfill the functional objectives and requirements. But while doing all these things, while the innovating, you are supposed to consider the limitations imposed by the practicality, the regulation, safety, and cost. Just remember that there is a cost involved in any innovation. So for the cost factor, we can't afford very developed nations engineering expert. For example, in robotics, we can't develop robots that NASA has developed because it costs huge. So the thing is that the challenge is for engineers like you is to develop based on the practicality, the regulation, the safety, and the cost aspects. So that is going to be a huge innovative challenge for the engineers in disaster management in the coming era or the coming decades or your lifetime. That is going to be assured. Well, to end up this particular session on disaster management, before having the question and answers, I would like to say that one of the American futurists, Alvin Toffler, in his book called Future Shock, if you get a chance, you please, it is a very good book. He has told that the illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So basically, no matter in disaster management or the engineering that you are going to be in the coming days, just remember these words that the illiterate of the coming future times are not going to the people who can't read or write. But as engineers, we are supposed to learn new things, unlearn that by the experience that we gain in our lives, by the experience that the world gives, and relearning. So the technologies that you are going to learn, the technologies that you are going to use, the cycle of learning, unlearning, and relearning is going to be the challenging thing for you all engineering aspirants in the coming times for the disaster management and also in your lives. No matter what discipline of engineering you are things you are going to be, there is a challenge in all parts of the engineering thing. I am basically as a chemical engineer, but now I am looking into so many engineering aspects because the challenges that is faced in the industry is huge. So we have learned many things in engineering. We learn many things in engineering, but we have to unlearn many things in the complex challenges that comes in front of us. So again, we have to relearn new things. We have to relearn new things. For example, in the times, because these are the times there are disruptive technologies have come in, disruptive ideas have come in. We are living in times of disruptive times. So, all the engineering students, I can only tell you that in your future, be prepared to learn many aspects, to unlearn it, relearn it based on your experience, based on your based on the guidance that you get, and uh, along with it, I like to wish all of you that I believe that some of you come out with the best things to this nation, to this country, and this society in the future, not only in disaster management, but in the new frontiers of engineering, no matter you are working in. So, thank you. So, thank you for this session. That is all what I have to say regarding disaster management. So, if you have any questions, I am over to Steffi sir. I hope that I have covered disaster management.
Thank
It's a big science. I have
yeah.
covered a little bit. Now over to you, Steffi, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was a very lengthy session, a busy schedule. You have delivered this in a very lengthy session. Thank you so much. Now I am taking questions from our participants. If any questions, please you can ask the is over. Any
Hello.
questions? Yes.
Yeah, students, if you have any questions, any queries, you can ask. Yeah, they have listened to this sessions very well. I think they have understood everything, I believe. Uh, so, so shall I?
So if no question means anyhow, thank you so much, sir. And the last quote was very nice. The illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. That was a very touching quote, and it was a very beautiful thing. And the future is that. That was very nice thing. Now, Naveen George, I'm inviting Naveen George, Assistant Professor, Safety and Fire Engineering, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. Uh, Good evening to one and all. Well, that was a very wonderful and informative session from Dr. Babu Josa. Well, he have explained very well regarding the disasters, types of disasters, and the importance of disaster management. And here, the first year, the young engineering aspirants have motivated by his session. Um, well, here he explained the role of young generation, especially these engineers in disaster management, the challenges to engineers to develop. Like they have to develop new drones, new rescue robots, disaster-prone vehicles, even this disaster-resistant building structure. So I believe actually it's not a job, not the job of a particular engineering branch. Actually, every engineering branch has something to put into this disaster management to control these disasters. So on behalf of the management of Toc H Institute of Science and Technology, so it's my pleasure to thank Dr. Babajos Sa, who gave his vital time from his busy schedule to grace this wonderful session. And I, I hope to have more sessions with you, sir. Once
Thank,
again, sir, thank you very much, sir,
thank you,
for this
Naveen, for your kind words.
knowledgeable session. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So it has been a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Now we can wind up.
you.